Hello, guys, and welcome to Plugged In Politics. For those of you returning, welcome back to the show. And if you're new here, you know what? Why don't you treat yourself? Go on ahead and click that follow button. You're not going to regret it. So for today's show, I think it's time that we give each political party, at least the major ones anyway, their own episode to look into their state of affairs. I think one of the things that slips under the radar for many people is that political parties are their own political / news ecosystems. You know, there's a variety of different conflicting interests, drama, and newsworthy initiatives that happen within these parties that then affect the broader political and policy initiatives that they take going forward. So today, I want to take a brief dive, cater to the Republican Party, and the insanity going on behind the curtain. You know, think of me as some sort of political doctor, diagnosing this political body with any ailment that I can find. And spoilers on the assessment, guys, there's a metastasizing cancer in this political body that can't be remedied lightly. It has to be taken pretty seriously if the Republican Party wants to survive into the 2024 primary. So on today's docket, we have MTG's expulsion from the House Freedom Caucus. Then we're going to follow that up with Senator Tommy Tuberville's, quote, ridiculous nomination blocks, and then cap off the show with Arizona's Republican Party's financial woes. So guys, let's hop onto the coals and get the show rolling. So on Wednesday, it was confirmed that Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has been removed from the House Freedom Caucus, citing her repeated attacks on GOP colleagues. Now, this comes just weeks after the viral confrontation she had with Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert, another Freedom Caucus member. Now, fun fact here, guys, Greene is the first lawmaker to be ousted from the Freedom Caucus since it was founded in 2015 by Representatives Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and Ron DeSantis. Other members of the caucus said a vote was taken on June 23rd to eject Greene over her vocal support for Representative Kevin McCarthy's bid for Speaker and his debt ceiling deal that he made with President Biden back in early June. So, wow. They actually did it. It was looking like this was, brewing for some time, but I'm surprised that the nut jobs finally did it. And if you are new to this whole situation and wondering why the caucus would do such an awful thing to poor old Marge, Colorado Representative Ken Buck had this to say on MSNBC News, Meet the Press Now.
Very quickly, Ken Buck, Marjorie Taylor Greene, do you want her to be a member of the Freedom Caucus or not?
She's not a member of the Freedom Caucus, and she shouldn't be in the future.
What did she do to, what makes somebody a good standing member at this point, as far as you're concerned?
Well, it really isn't political views. We have had differences on votes for a long time. It is the ability to come together and have meaningful discussions every week about bills that we're going to be considering. She has consistently attacked other members of the Freedom Caucus in an irresponsible way, and as a result of that, she was kicked out of the Freedom Caucus, and she should not be a member. We have diverse opinions in the Freedom Caucus. It's not monolithic. But insofar as attacking other members, it just shouldn't be tolerated over and over again. It's not one simple attack. It's not what happened on the floor a few weeks ago with Lauren Boebert. It is a series of really poorly thought out attacks on other members.
So to kind of sum up everything to this point, as Kim Buck pointed out there, MTG has been ruffling feathers within the caucus for practically the entirety of the 118th Congress. Like I said earlier, she splintered off from the group during the speakership vote for McCarthy when the caucus's objective was to stall and prolong the election to gain concessions and then shore up disproportional power within the House. And to be fair, MTG's split really didn't have any effect on that. Like, they got the ability to change House rules and put McCarthy in a straitjacket. Hell, they have the power to initiate a vote of no confidence whenever they like. But during this whole process, it was really interesting to watch MTG try and leverage her connection and unwavering loyalty to Trump as an appeal to their senses. But they didn't even bite on that. The caucus is full of members who, although are kind of crazy on policy, they are becoming procedurally cutthroat to the point that, being on Trump's side is no longer the brand. Of course, they'll dish out their obligated dissent for the indictment and any action against Trump, but furthering his presidential, power ambitions is no longer the goal. In fact, I think they've come to realize that it's been kind of a limiting factor for many of their ambitions. Even further, you saw their animosity towards Greene during the debt ceiling deal that McCarthy made with Biden. This was another point where Green broke the caucus line and sided with McCarthy. Now, the Freedom Caucus was ruthless in advocating for concessions from Biden for a debt ceiling lift, almost to the point that they became vehemently against any debt ceiling raise whatsoever. And just so everybody's refreshed on what I'm talking about, obviously back in June, we had to raise the debt ceiling, which we do procedurally pretty much every other year at this point. And if we don't, it's basically economic collapse across the world. I'm not even overstating that fact. That's the point. Okay? It's practically holding a gun to the world's economy to get whatever political concessions you want out of it. And to be fair, McCarthy held the party line overall on this front, and then eventually made the deal at the last second when he really wanted to, and basically got what he wanted. New limitations on welfare, different cuts to different social spending programs, a revamping into military spending. You name it, they got it. McCarthy basically got everything he could out of that deal, really as much as you could have asked for. Look, as much as I dislike the members of the Freedom Caucus, and as you know, I have a one-sided beef with Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz, I do have to give them this. They're loud, and they have shaken the party to their whims in many cases during this congressional cycle. However, if you'll notice, it really hasn't been much over policy. The majority of the time, they never split the party line with policy-related votes. The main points where they've made noise have been with petty arguments and personal quarrels. I mean, for Christ's sake, they tried to completely defund the Department of Education. All this to say, this is just further proof of the Republican Civil War going on. I know I've lightly brought up this point in the past, but now is as good a time as any to really expand this point. It's really been brewing since January 6th, but it's just now starting to boil over following the 2022 midterms, and it really kind of splintered off from there because there's so many conflicting interests on where to take the party going forward. There are three main factions within this war. You have one faction that is entirely dedicated to the perpetuation of MAGA rhetoric and getting Trump back into power. You know, the idea of attaining a strong man despite his toxic optics, political ramifications, and messaging. Another faction is the old guard, your establishment types, like your Mitt Romneys and your Mitch McConnells, who are focused on policy-related goals to garner more money and services to their donors. Although they once saw the MAGA rhetoric as a means to getting elected, establishment types have now shifted to where Trump is more of an obstacle to their long-term viability, and it's just created a little bit more derision in this regard. Then you have the third faction. There you have people like Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, and other members of the Freedom Caucus that have taken the rhetoric from Trump's playbook, and instead of viewing it as a means to getting elected to enact corporate policy, they've now morphed it into the policy itself. Look, I'm all for turmoil in the GOP, but I gotta say, I really don't know who's gonna come out on top once the smoke settles. The establishment GOP has more resources and inside connections on the Hill, but the Freedom Caucus has such disproportional, House power in their favor, it kind of mixes things up. But then possibly the most impactful imbalance in this equation goes to the MAGA diehards. Trump currently leads the primary polls by a mile, and we're going to talk on this point later, but for now, what's more important is that he has a massive lead despite his legal peril. I think it's been proven that the Trump base just isn't going away. The faction holds such a massive advantage in the fact that any attempts to disregard or oust MAGA diehards from power might have severe populist blowbacks. I know this is a lot to extrapolate from one member being ousted from a fringe caucus, but these little things, they just add up, and it'll be interesting to see where the chips land when things really heat up. I think it's all truly going to boil over next year for the 2024 presidential, campaign cycle. There's going to be a test for all three of these factions. And that's going to be early next year when the Trump classified documents case finally starts, getting rolling. And it's going to entirely define the Republican primary landscape for not just the presidential candidates, but for everyone else. Kind of like the 2022 midterms, there was a significant difference between standard Republican candidates and MAGA-backed, Trump-backed candidates in congressional districts and senators. And the track record basically goes about 90% of Trump's candidates lost in the midterms. I don't know what the case is going to be once the indictment case happens. Because we all know that within the Republican primary, the indictment has only helped Trump so far in the polling. But as far as general polling, for a nationwide election, it's only hurt him. So I don't know if the Republican efforts next year are going to be weakened because of this or strengthened in certain aspects. But I do know one thing. It's gonna heat things up regardless. But hey, don't take my word for it. You see, I'm just a random guy on the sound waves ranting to a microphone with 7 viewers. If you trust anything I say wholeheartedly and get burned, I don't know what to say to you. That's on you, buddy.